At 88 years old, George Harper had lived through a lot. He'd seen the world change in ways he could never have imagined, from the simplicity of his childhood in the 1930s to the rapid technological shifts of the 21st century. He had married the love of his life, Evelyn, in the summer of 1950, and together they had built a life full of memories, love, and the quiet strength of simple living. George was a man of routine. Every morning, he would wake up early, brew a pot of coffee, and sit at his kitchen table looking out at the small garden he had tended to for decades. He would think about his years working as a civil engineer, about the people he had helped and the family he had raised. Now, in his later years, George lived alone after Evelyn passed away 5 years earlier. It had been a hard adjustment, but his children, Lucy and Michael, kept in touch regularly. He was surrounded by the warmth of memories, and though the house felt quieter without Evelyn's laughter, it still felt like home. George had always been careful with his finances. He wasn't wealthy, but he had worked hard throughout his life, saved diligently, and planned for his future. He had always trusted the system, trusted that his retirement and health would be secure, just as he had been promised. But in the autumn of his years, George was hit with an unexpected storm, one that would test his faith in the very system he had relied on. It all started with an accident, a simple fall. George had been getting out of his car in the driveway when he tripped on the uneven pavement. His shoulder slammed into the side of the vehicle, and for the first time in years, he felt something give. The pain was sharp, immediate, and unrelenting. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors confirmed that he had broken his shoulder. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but it required surgery, and at George's age, recovery was going to be a long and painful process. It would take months for him to regain full mobility. He would need physical therapy, medication, and time off to heal. He filed a claim with his longtime health insurance company, expecting them to cover the expenses. After all, he had paid into the plan for decades. It was supposed to be his safety net in times like these. But weeks passed, and George heard nothing. The bills from the hospital and surgery piled up. Every day, the pain in his shoulder worsened, but the financial burden weighed heavier on him. The letters from the insurance company kept arriving, but each one was more confusing than the last. Finally, the letter came. It was a short, cold note, blunt in its delivery. "Your claim has been denied. Reason, pre-existing condition." George stared at the letter in disbelief. Pre-existing condition? He had been a loyal customer for over 40 years. He had paid his premiums every month without fail. How could they deny him? What had happened to the trust he had placed in them all these years? The insurance company's explanation made no sense. George didn't have any pre-existing conditions that were related to his shoulder. Sure, he had arthritis, but it wasn't anything that would have affected his ability to recover from a fall. He called the insurance company, hoping for clarity. The representative on the phone was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but according to your records, your arthritis qualifies as a pre-existing condition. The fall, in combination with that condition, is why the claim was denied." George was stunned. "But I've been paying for this insurance for years. This is why I have it. What am I supposed to do now?" The representative apologized again, but it was clear that there was nothing she could do. George was just another case, another number in a vast system that had turned its back on him. For the first time in his life, George felt powerless. George wasn't the type to give up. He had fought for everything he had in life, and he wasn't about to let an insurance company take everything from him in his old age. But he also knew that he couldn't take this fight on alone. He called his daughter, Lucy, who immediately sprang into action. She was a lawyer, and though she specialized in corporate law, she knew the importance of standing up for what was right. "Dad, we're going to fight this," she told him firmly, a fire in her voice that George hadn't heard in years. "You've worked hard for everything you have. We're not going to let them get away with this." Lucy gathered the necessary documents, including medical records, the denial letter from the insurance company, and proof of George's long history of health insurance payments. She filed a formal appeal with the insurance company, requesting a review of their decision. But the company didn't budge. The appeal was denied as well. "This is going to court," Lucy said, determination in her voice. "We're going to expose what they've done to you. We'll make them answer for this." George wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let them silence him, especially not now, when he was so close to the end of his journey. The court day arrived, and George, though frail, walked into the courtroom with his head held high. He was a man of principle, and no matter his age, he wasn't going to let this system trample on him. He sat at the table next to Lucy, feeling the weight of the situation. His body ached with pain from the fall, but his mind was sharper than it had ever been. The courtroom was busy, filled with lawyers and legal representatives. At the front, sitting in sharp suits, was the lawyer for the insurance company. His expression was smug, confident, as though he already knew how this would end. Lucy rose to speak first, laying out the case for the judge. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Harper, has been paying into this insurance company for over 40 years. He has never once missed a payment. His insurance coverage should have protected him, especially in a situation like this, an injury from a fall. To deny him his claim based on a pre-existing condition that is unrelated to his injury is a direct violation of his rights as a policyholder." The insurance company's lawyer stood to counter. "Your Honor, the claim was denied in accordance with the terms of the policy. Pre-existing conditions are clearly stated in the contract, and Mr. Harper's arthritis falls under that category." But as the lawyer spoke, something unexpected happened. Lucy noticed a small detail in the insurance company's paperwork that didn't sit right. "Your Honor," she interrupted, "I'd like to submit additional evidence. This document shows that the company failed to disclose to Mr. Harper that arthritis would be considered a pre-existing condition under the terms of his policy." The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked up from the documents, his gaze narrowing. "Is this true?" he asked the insurance lawyer. The lawyer hesitated. He had not anticipated this argument. "We will need to review our records, Your Honor." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs after Lucy's interruption. The judge, who had been listening attentively to the insurance company's lawyer, now had his attention fully focused on the new evidence. George sat quietly, his hands resting on the table before him, his eyes trained on the judge. He had fought his whole life for fairness, and now he was fighting for something even bigger: the truth. The lawyer for the insurance company, clearly flustered, turned to his colleague sitting in the back, signaling for a moment of counsel. But the judge was having none of it. "I'm giving you 5 minutes," the judge said firmly. "If there's anything more to this case, I expect you to reveal it now." The tension in the room was thick. The insurance lawyer, who had come into this case with the confidence of someone who expected an easy win, now looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. As the lawyer huddled with his colleague, George's thoughts drifted. How could they do this? How could they lie to me for so long? He had trusted them with his health, with his future. He had paid every premium on time, never once doubting that when the time came, they would be there to help. But now he was learning that his trust had been misplaced. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the deception, the manipulation, and the cruelty of a company that cared more about profit than the people who had kept it running for decades. The insurance lawyer returned to the front, his expression tight. "Your Honor," he said, his voice unsteady, "after reviewing the documents, we acknowledge there has been a failure on our part. The policy language regarding pre-existing conditions was not clearly explained to Mr. Harper when he first signed up for his insurance." A wave of disbelief rippled through the courtroom. George's heart skipped. He had not expected this. He had hoped for an admission of guilt, but hearing them acknowledge their wrongdoing was a bitter pill to swallow. The insurance lawyer continued, now stumbling through his words. "We regret that Mr. Harper was not made fully aware of how his arthritis would affect his coverage. It was an oversight,
but we are prepared to offer a settlement to resolve the matter." The judge, unmoved, leaned forward. "A settlement?" he asked, his voice stern. "What kind of settlement are you offering?" The lawyer hesitated before speaking again. "We are willing to reduce the amount owed by Mr. Harper to a more manageable figure, $4,000, and we would drop any additional fees or penalties associated with the claim." It was a meager offer, a far cry from the full reimbursement George had expected. But as Lucy scanned the documents that the insurance company had handed over, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. "Your Honor," Lucy said, rising to her feet once more, "I'd like to submit one more piece of evidence. It's a document from the insurance company's internal records. It shows that Mr. Harper's claim was never properly reviewed after the initial denial. This is not just an oversight, it's a deliberate attempt to minimize the payout to one of their oldest clients." The room fell silent. The judge's expression darkened as he glanced at the document that Lucy handed over. He read through it, his eyes narrowing with each line. "This is damning," the judge said, looking at the insurance lawyer. "You are telling me that this company, who has been paid millions by loyal customers, deliberately withheld necessary information, hoping that an elderly man would just accept the denial without contest." The insurance lawyer didn't have a response. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Lucy turned to the judge, her voice steady and unwavering. "Your Honor, the $4,000 settlement is an insult to my client. He's been paying into this system for over 60 years. He deserves more than just a token amount. He deserves a full reimbursement, and he deserves an apology." The judge didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he thought over the gravity of the situation. Then, after a long pause, he addressed the insurance company's lawyer. "This case isn't just about one man's claim," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about how this company has treated thousands of people just like Mr. Harper, denied their claims, ignored their needs, and turned a blind eye to the suffering of their own clients. You may have gotten away with this in the past, but not today." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The insurance lawyer, realizing that the judge wasn't going to back down, finally relented. "Your Honor," he began hesitantly, "we are prepared to offer full compensation for Mr. Harper's medical bills, plus an additional amount for damages. We will also pay a penalty for the mishandling of his claim." The judge looked at him intently. "And will you be making a public admission of your error and apology to Mr. Harper and to all those who were affected by this practice?" The lawyer's face flushed. He knew there was no getting out of it now. "Yes, Your Honor," he said reluctantly. "We will make a formal public apology." Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders as the judge nodded in approval. The ruling wasn't just a financial victory, it was a moral one. A victory for the system of justice that had seemed so distant just hours earlier. The judge wrapped up the case by delivering his final verdict. "I am ordering the full reimbursement of Mr. Harper's medical bills, as well as a public apology from the insurance company. Additionally, I am imposing a penalty of $25,000 on this company for their failure to disclose crucial information and for causing unnecessary harm to a loyal customer." George sat there, stunned. This wasn't just a win, it was a statement. It was a victory not only for him, but for all the others who had been wronged by the system. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause, a sign of approval from the public, and a small but significant moment of recognition for George. He had fought not just for himself, but for those who would come after him. "Thank you," George whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to Lucy, his daughter, and smiled. "We did it. We won." Lucy embraced her father, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Dad. You showed them what real courage is." The insurance company, now publicly embarrassed, began to pack up their papers, knowing they had lost this battle in a way they could never undo. As they left the courtroom, George turned to Lucy. "I'm glad I didn't give up, but it shouldn't have come to this. No one should have to fight like this. No one should be treated like this at the end of their life." The fallout from George's case rippled far beyond the courtroom. News outlets across the country reported on the case, shining a light on the systematic injustice faced by elderly citizens who were vulnerable to exploitation by insurance companies. George Harper became a symbol of resilience, not only for his community, but for all those who had ever felt powerless. And as the insurance company began to publicly revise its policies and issue public apologies, George's case became a turning point. His fight was not just about one man's victory. It was about exposing the greed that often ran rampant behind closed doors. In the end, George Harper's battle was won not by money or legal tactics, but by his unwavering commitment to doing what was right.
George Harper sat in his favorite chair, the sunlight streaming through the window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden floors of his living room. He had won, not just in the courtroom, but in a battle that seemed too big to ever win. At 88 years old, George had fought against a giant, and for the first time in his life, it felt like the giant had fallen. The victory over the insurance company wasn't just about the money, though the reimbursement was a relief. It wasn't even about the public apology, which felt like a hollow gesture coming from a company that had spent years mistreating its customers. No, this victory was about something deeper. It was about justice. It was about standing up when everyone else said it wasn't worth it. George's case had become a beacon of hope for others who had been treated the same way. Elderly men and women, the sick and the vulnerable, who had trusted the system only to have it turn its back on them. George's fight had brought attention to the larger issue, one that had been ignored for too long. The ripple effect, the voices that rose. As soon as the news of George's victory hit the media, something remarkable began to happen. Letters flooded in from people across the country, many of them older citizens who had been through similar battles with insurance companies. They were inspired by George's courage, and they felt empowered by his victory. Lucy, George's daughter, spent hours sorting through the letters. Some were simple thank yous. Others were much longer. Personal stories of hardship, of financial struggles, of being denied claims when they needed help the most. These were the voices of people who had been silenced by the system for too long. As the hospital's lawyer finished his speech, the judge turned his gaze to Clara, the weight of the room settling on her shoulders. "Miss Matthews," the judge said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. This was her moment to explain, to tell her story. But she hesitated. The fear that had been building in her chest since the day she received the bill came rushing forward. She was just an old woman, struggling to survive. What could she say that would make a difference? But then she thought of her family, of the life she had led. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. "I've worked my whole life. I was a teacher for over 40 years. I spent my days educating children, teaching them to read and write. I loved my job. I loved the children, but I never made a lot of money. I never had a lot of things. My husband, George, and I, we lived simply, but we were happy." A lump formed in Clara's throat, and she paused for a moment, taking a shaky breath. The room was silent, listening. "When George passed away, I thought I could make it on my own. But now with this bill, I feel like everything I've worked for, everything I've built, is falling apart. I don't have the money to pay this. I don't know where it's supposed to come from. But I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just asking for some understanding. I've given all I have, Your Honor. I'm 90 years old. I don't have time to pay off this kind of debt. I just want to live the rest of my life in peace." As Clara spoke, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had filled the room seemed to loosen, and even the lawyer for the hospital hesitated. Clara's words had cut through the cold, clinical nature of the proceedings, revealing the humanity at the heart of this case. She wasn't just a name on a ledger. She was a person, a woman who had lived a full life, who had given everything she could, and now had reached the end of her journey. The judge's surprising response. The judge sat quietly for a moment, his expression unreadable. Clara's heart raced as she waited for his decision. Would he rule in favor of the hospital? Would they take everything from her, leaving her with nothing? Then, to Clara's surprise, the judge spoke. "Miss Matthews," he said slowly, "I've heard your testimony, and I believe this court has failed to take into account the circumstances you are facing. The amount you owe is large, but this is not simply a matter of money. You are not a criminal. You are a woman in need who has given her life to this country and to her community. The system may have forgotten you, but I will not." Clara felt a surge of hope rise within her, but it was quickly followed by confusion. Was this really happening? "I will be postponing any further action on this case. Instead, I am ordering the hospital to reassess the situation. I will require the billing department to meet with Miss Matthews and come up with a reasonable plan that takes into account her age, her income, and her health." The room went silent. The hospital's lawyer looked stunned, his mouth hanging open. Clara, meanwhile, felt her breath catch in her throat. Was this real? Was she hearing this correctly? "This court will not allow elderly citizens to be crushed under the weight of medical debt. I am ordering that Miss Matthews' case be reviewed on compassionate grounds, and I will personally ensure that the hospital follows through." Clara blinked, unable to believe what she was hearing. For the first time in months, a glimmer of hope filled her chest. You mean they won't take everything from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper.
The judge nodded, his eyes softening. No, they won't. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Evelyn Davis, a 72-year-old woman from Tennessee who had suffered a stroke the year before. Her insurance had refused to cover her rehabilitation costs, stating that she had a pre-existing condition, a condition she had never been diagnosed with before. The letter was heartbreaking. "I never thought I'd see someone fight like you did," Evelyn wrote. "I've been struggling with my bills for months. I thought I was just going to lose everything. But after hearing your story, I feel like I can fight back." Lucy read the letter aloud to George, who sat quietly, a mix of disbelief and gratitude in his eyes. "I never thought it would reach this many people," George said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just wanted to make sure they didn't get away with it. I didn't know it would turn into this." As more stories like Evelyn's came to light, public outcry grew louder. The media coverage of George's case turned into a movement, and soon the insurance company that had wronged him found itself in the crosshairs of an angry public. People began to demand change. They flooded social media with messages of support for George and demands for accountability from the insurance company. The company, once confident in its ability to dismiss and ignore complaints, now had no choice but to listen. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They had no idea that a case involving one elderly man could unravel their carefully constructed image, but that's exactly what had happened. George's case had exposed the cracks in the system, the way elderly patients were treated like second-class citizens, the way their needs were ignored, their claims denied. It was a system built on profit, not care, and now the public had seen it. Under the mounting pressure, the insurance company agreed to a full review of its policies. They announced changes that would affect how they handled claims for elderly patients, as well as a more transparent approach to pre-existing conditions. While the changes were significant, many saw them as little more than a Band-Aid over a much deeper wound. Lucy was invited to sit on the board of an advisory committee aimed at ensuring better treatment for elderly patients. She was reluctant at first, but after seeing how George's case had sparked such a change, she knew it was an opportunity to continue the fight. "It's not enough to win a case," she told her father. "We need to keep pushing for change, for all the other people out there who don't have a voice." Just when George thought he could finally put the whole ordeal behind him, the insurance company issued its formal apology. It was a full-page ad in several major newspapers, offering a public apology to George for the mishandling of his claim, as well as to the millions of other policyholders they had wronged over the years. While the apology was a small step forward, George couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little too late. The company had only issued the apology because they were forced to, because of the pressure the public had placed on them. "They should have done this a long time ago," George said bitterly. "But I guess this is how things change. You have to make noise for them to listen." George never received an apology directly from the CEO or the board, but in the end it didn't matter. What mattered was that the company was finally being held accountable,
and the changes they were forced to make would help future generations. Months passed, and George slowly began to feel like his life was returning to normal. The pain from his injury had lessened, and the settlement from the insurance company had eased some of the financial pressure. But it was the fight that had truly changed him. He had fought for what was right, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly by the system. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, George thought back on everything that had happened. He thought of the judge who had believed in him, the lawyer who had fought for him, and his daughter Lucy, who had stood by him every step of the way. He thought of all the people who had been inspired by his story, the letters, the messages, the small victories that had come out of his own battle. It's not about the money, George thought to himself. It never was. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. It's about standing up when no one else will. George Harper passed away peacefully in his sleep a year later, surrounded by family and friends. His case, though, would live on, as a symbol of what happens when one person refuses to be silenced. The changes in the insurance industry, though small, were significant. They were a direct result of George's fight, a fight that many believed was unwinnable. His case became a landmark in the fight for better treatment of elderly patients and fair insurance practices. His daughter Lucy continued to work toward the changes her father had started, ensuring that his legacy of courage and justice would never be forgotten. Sometimes, she said in a speech later, you have to fight for the things that matter, because if you don't, no one will.